Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of this introduction to water safety plan auditing. We're very happy to be here with you again. Let's begin today by reviewing what we did on days 1 and 2. On day 1, we covered water safety plan steps and key terms, as well as what, why, who, and when of WSP auditing. Yesterday, we covered what to do before an audit, including how to prepare the water supplier to set up a successful audit. We also spent some time navigating through the audit toolbox, including the scoring form and the note-taking form. We showed you how you can easily locate this toolbox online by entering WSP Auditing into your search engine and downloading it from the WHO website. So to touch again on the topic of audit preparations, we have with us today David Sheehan, Senior Water Quality and Regulatory Advisor at Coliban Water in Victoria, Australia. David will be familiar to many of you, including our colleagues in Vietnam. So welcome, David. Could you please turn on your mic and video if you haven't already? And could you please tell us a bit about regulatory auditing at Coliban Water, including your own role?
Thank you very much, Angela. I think as some people online may know, in Victoria, which is my home state here in Australia, we've had a mandatory requirement for the last 15 years to have water safety plans in place, and that's under our Safe Drinking Water Act. And that act also requires water utilities like ourselves to undergo regulatory audits of our WSPs. And actually, coincidentally, we had our 7th regulatory audit in July this year. A little bit of a different one, doing it in a COVID-safe manner, but yes, we went through an audit. I'm very pleased to say that we passed that audit. But yes, so we have had a long history with auditing of our water safety plan in Victoria. Okay.
Firstly, congratulations on the successful outcome of the recent audit. Can you please tell us a little bit about what's typically involved in those audits? It sounds like this year was a bit of a different year. So maybe you can talk us through maybe a more typical year.
Yep. So the way that the audits work is that our Ministry of Health will write to Coliban Water and say, we would like you to undertake an independent audit of your water safety plan. We then have to nominate an auditor, which the Ministry of Health approves, and then we negotiate with the auditor the audit. So how many days it will go for, what sites will be visited, what paperwork the auditor would like to see and review, and who they would like to interview while they're on site. So our audit this year covered 3 days. There was 2 days of site visits to ensure that our water safety plan had actually been implemented in the field, and a day interviewing staff who have the responsibility for managing the review and update of the water safety plan to make sure it was current. So I guess there's 2 basic components. One is making sure that the water safety plan contains all the details as required by the legislation. And secondly, that water safety plan has been implemented out in the field at our water treatment plants and other treatment sites.
Okay, thank you for that. So it's clear that the WSP audit really demands a lot of yourself and your staff at Coliban Water.
So I think we had a total of, over the 3 days, I think we had a total of 17 or 18 staff involved, and that ranged from senior executives who are interviewed to work out their understanding of the way we do the management of risk around drinking water quality, through to operational staff who manage our water treatment facilities to make sure that the staff, those water treatment staff, actually understood how their plants are operating within the risk management framework or the water safety plan framework.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for explaining that. So is it fair to say then, when we think about all that's required of yourself and your team for the water supplier side, sort of to be audited, it's fair to say that you really do need plenty of preparation, don't you?
Yes.
You need to,
Yes, we do.
understand the audit plan and what will be asked of you.
Well, I guess we've been very lucky here in Victoria, where, as I mentioned at the start, we've now had WSPs in place for 15 years as a regulatory requirement. So I guess we have turned, I guess, the WSP into pretty much business as usual. So we have a pretty mature system. But yes, there is a lot of work because we spend a fair bit of time in the lead up to the audit, making sure that if we go to a particular site, that there's the evidence available that the WSP has been implemented, that particularly the information in the WSP, and that tends to be around the limits around critical control points and the schematics around how the system work are current, particularly if we've had any upgrades to water treatment facilities in the last couple of years. So yes, even though we do have a mature system, there is a lot of work that goes on at the back end. I think probably one of the bits that I missed, Angela, is that the Ministry of Health here issues a guidance note, which guides the auditors and ourselves around how the audit will be conducted. But ultimately, it's the auditor our independent auditor has responsibility for choosing the sites that they go to, how many sites, and what other information that they would like to review as part of that audit.
And all of that would be communicated with you before the audit.
That's correct, yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So, again, in our case, we send auditors a lot of information prior to them turning up on site. So they get a full copy of our water safety plan, plus any other documents they would like to see, so they can do a bit of preparation prior to them arriving. Because even though it goes to 3 days, there often isn't a lot of time to review all the documents, and that helps the auditor, I guess, prepare what questions and issues they would like to discuss with us. And then we work through, again, before they arrive, a very detailed plan of what will happen each day, who will be interviewed, so that that the people are who are going to be interviewed are available, and gets work at a no surprises approach.
Okay, thank you so much, David. That's helpful. It's helpful for us to hear the perspective of a water supplier and understand just how much is involved on your end, and to reflect on that as auditors. And just, we have an important role in sort of getting organized and helping these water suppliers, prepare for this audit. We have an important job to do in the preparation stage to set up a successful audit.
That's correct, yes.
So thank you so much, David. Really appreciate your time. Okay, so now we have a bit of time to answer some questions that you folks submitted yesterday using the chat box. The first question that we have from the group is, when undertaking the system description, the issues along the system, like the catchment land use, the activities around the sources, and water quality issues, should also be described. So the question is, why are questions related to hazards and hazardous events only asked in section 3 of the scoring form? Daryl, can you take a stab at answering that one?
Yeah, good. So this question is a good question, and it seems to be related to an activity we did yesterday in which we were locating questions in the scoring sheet about hazard and hazardous events. So the question is, as I understand it, well, doesn't the system description describe hazards and hazardous events? And if so, why don't we say that some of the system description questions are also describing hazards and hazardous events? And I can see some logic to that question, because in one sense, the system description is describing issues being faced. For example, in the catchment, it is going to describe a whole lot of issues there. And I agree that the information given in the system description, that's module 2, forms the foundation for the hazards and hazardous events, which are fully defined in module 3. So perhaps if the activity asked us to locate questions in the scoring sheet about hazardous events only, then I'm hoping you would agree that the system description is not really relevant. So perhaps we just need to rethink how we phrase that question for the next time we do that, Angela.
That makes sense, Daryl. So what's the second question?
Okay, there was another question here. And the question is, do we have WSP auditing compulsory, like stated in regulations or something like that, in any country in the region? Would you like to have a go of that one, Angela?
Yes, you bet. So thanks to whoever sent that question through. It's an important one. So what I have here are a couple of slides that show you the most up-to-date data that we have that's been fully validated. So in this table here, we have all of the countries in these two regions, SEARO and WPRO, that have formal policies or regulations in place that either promote or require water safety plans. So you can see there's a number of countries in the regions with WSP policies or regulations. Where WSPs are required versus promoted only, WSP auditing is implied, as it's the only way to confirm compliance with WSP requirements. But beyond this, we do know of several countries that have explicit WSP audit requirements. I'll show those on the next slide. So disclaimer, this is just to the best of my knowledge. This might not be 100% up to date. So to the best of my knowledge, these countries that are highlighted in yellow have policies or regulations that explicitly address WSP auditing. So I'd like to invite countries that are participating in this training to please weigh in via chat if anything here needs to be augmented or corrected. I invite participants to correct me if I'm mistaken, but this is the information that I have. Okay, our third and final question from the group was, does an auditor need to go through the whole list in the improvement plan when carrying out an audit? And Bonnie helped us yesterday by responding to that person who asked the question by saying, I think we don't need to go through all the list, but just select the most critical ones. So thank you, Bonnie, for sharing that response. And Daryl, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll just make a few extra comments. And my comments are going to have a much broader auditing context to what Bonnie had said there. So I think it depends on how many there are, how many improvement plans. So if there are only 3 or 4, then it may be feasible for the auditor to look at every one of those. But if there's like 20 or 30 of them, you might start be needing to select some, because by nature of the time and resources, the auditing cannot look at absolutely everything. So that comment just doesn't apply to improvement plans, but to all the other topics that an auditor will look at. So an auditor needs to do what she or he can do in the time, but sometimes we'll have to put practical limits on how much they can comment on. And for that reason, the auditor needs to be clearly state in the audit report, which is the thing they do at the end, as to what they did and what they looked at, so that everything is very clear. However, so you may have to be restrictive, but I can tell you, you'll be surprised at what you can do in a short time in a well-planned auditor meeting if you've done all your homework.
Thank you for that, Daryl, and thanks to all of you for your questions. Please do keep them coming. We'll review questions at the end of the day again today and try to address them at the start of tomorrow. So now Daryl will share with everyone via the chat box our breakout activity worksheet for today. So as usual, when Daryl shares that, please go ahead and download it and keep it somewhere where you can readily access it. You could save it to your desktop or just keep it open in the background. Now Daryl will orient us to where we are in the WSP audit process. Over to you, Daryl.
Yesterday, we covered the processes and tools in the before phase of the audit. And today we're going to discuss what to do during and after the audit. And we saw this slide yesterday, so I'll focus on the headline issues. During the audit, this is actually what you do. You conduct an Inception meeting, review documents, interview staff, and visit some sites. That's the first thing you do. You secondly take notes and assign scores. and then you prepare a preliminary report and you conduct an exit meeting.
So this brings us to our first breakout activity for today. As usual, Daryl will assign all of you to new groups today, and you'll be in these same groups all day. And each room will have at least one facilitator. So we have some very interesting breakout session topics later today, and we're really keen to help you make the most of the opportunity to engage with your colleagues in the breakout rooms. So the primary goal of this next breakout session will be to briefly introduce yourselves to one another. So with the time that remains after introductions, here is the discussion question. What do you think are the main objectives of the audit inception meeting? Remember that Daryl just told us that an auditor should begin every on-site audit with a meeting with the water supplier. So the question for the group is, what do you think is the purpose of this kickoff meeting? What topics should be covered? So in just a moment here, Daryl is going to send you to your breakout rooms where you'll have 8 minutes. As usual, you'll get that 2-minute warning before the session ends, and we will see you soon.
Okay, so everybody, welcome back. I hope that you got some good discussion. Time sure flies along in these little breakout rooms, doesn't it? How did you go? So here's some ideas, and hopefully you identified some of these ideas. This is to answer the question, you know, what's the purpose of having an inception meeting? So these are just some ideas. It might, a reason for having an inception meeting is to describe the process that the audit is going to go through. That's one thing that the inception meeting would do. It would also describe the tools, including the scoring criteria, explaining how the system will work and how the scoring will work. You just check and confirm that about the audit plan, what time you're going to this site, and check that you're going to see the things you had arranged on. And really importantly, you set the right tone, because you want to remind the supplier that an audit is a learning and a growing opportunity. So it's not meant to be scary. So for example, if you go into the audit meeting and you're overdressed in a suit and a tie, it could be a little overwhelming for people. So you have to set the right tone, and the inception meeting is a really good place to do that. So you've now had a little bit of thinking about an inception meeting. And I want you to imagine that we're about to do one, and we're going to have a small role play with David, who you met before, David from Collaben Water in Victoria, Australia. And David will play the part of being an auditor and deliver these slides, which you'll see very soon, as if he's delivering the audit inception meeting to you, and you are all part of the WSP team, and you're sort of nervous because you know you're going to be audited, and David's there to just lead you through that first process. Now you need to forget David, the water supplier, who you just met before, and you can see on the nice video there. And you need to think, so David was the water supplier, and you need to forget that, because David is now an auditor with this nice little cap on. And David, thank you for leading this meeting and to kick off this audit, and I'll move on to your first slide.
Thank you very much, Daryl. And I'll have to order a couple of those hats, I think, for when the next time I'm out doing some water supply auditing work. Well, firstly, I'd like to welcome everyone here today. It's absolutely fantastic that we've got around 52 staff from the water supply here today in this meeting. So my name is David Sheehan. I'm from the Ministry of Health, and I'm the lead WSP assessor for the ministry. And today I would like to walk you through this inception meeting. I really do appreciate everyone's time. We know everyone's time is valuable, and we hope we can get the best out of these next couple of days. So just to run you a little bit over what we'll be covering in this inception meeting. Firstly, we'll be giving a brief overview of the roles and responsibilities of all participants, so that we're all very clear what we'll be doing over the next couple of days. Discuss the WSP audit type and the objectives we'd like to see out the end of this audit. And then we'll run you through the plan that we have and agree that that's the plan that we'll operate on under over the next couple of days. So we obviously have a lot of people in the room today, and again, I really do like to thank everyone for turning up, and it's great to see the level of interest and enthusiasm for this audit. So I guess looking at the different roles that we have, I notice over to my left there we have the staff that have been involved in the development of the WSP. So I'll be chatting to those staff members around the documents and reviewing the documents and making sure that they cover off on all the required content. Up to my right, I can see over there a bunch of technical staff who operate your water treatment facilities. We're looking very much forward to getting out into the field and visiting a couple of sites, and we'll be working through with those staff the important role they have on the implementation of the WSP, because we want to make sure through this audit that not only do you have a document that covers off the required content, but that's also been implemented, and that's a very important part of WSP. And I noticed up the back of the room, there's some representations from senior management, and I'm really pleased to see that senior management is here, because it's always important to me as an auditor to see that all levels of the organisation understand and have a keen understand, and also have an investment in the application and implementation of WSPs for the improvement of drinking water quality. So hopefully that will gives everyone a little bit of an overview of what they'll be doing over the next couple of days and what information we'll be seeking from them. Again, if we have any time for questions, we'll take that. So I think, as we all know from the information that was sent through to you earlier this month, this is what we term an external formal audit. So the Ministry of Health is coming to make sure that the regulations are being met regarding WSPs. So the objectives of this audit, firstly, as you can see there on the slide, is one, to check that the WSP is complete, is up to date, so it reflects current practice and has been implemented in that practice. We obviously want to support the continuous improvement of WSPs. So I just want to reinforce at this stage, as we go through this Inception meeting, that we're not purely here from the ministry to look at, I guess, finding fault, but what we want to do is work on that continuous improvement aspect of WSPs and look for opportunities where you can improve your WSP. But obviously there's also that aspect of regulatory compliance, because we want to make sure that not only is the WSP complete and that there's a continuous improvement aspect, but obviously we need to make sure that the relevant legislation is being complied with. So as I've sort of mentioned a couple of times, WSP audits are a great learning opportunity for all involved. And again, it's great to see so many people here today involved in that Inception meeting. I really look forward to learning about your organisation and sharing my ideas and experiences from elsewhere, and that feeds into that continuous improvement aspect, because we do want to see this as a way that we can share and provide opportunities for that improvement in WSP practice. And I'm sure that you will all agree, no matter how good your system is, there's always room for improvement. So I think one of the things I'd like to reinforce from the ministry's perspective is that we do view WSPs as a living document, not a document that you prepare and then forget about, but it's evolving document to guide your risk management practice. So again, yeah, it's all about learning, improving, and this is being carried out in an open and transparent manner. So I think you would have already received this information, but this is the scoring system that we'll be using during the WSP audit across the 9 elements listed on that slide there. As I go through each of those elements and speak to staff and review documentation, we'll be scoring each of those questions on a 1 to 4 scale, and the scoring is designed to be quite strict and requires evidence. And I think that's a very important thing, is that the scores will be based on what evidence you provide, and so that it is a fairly objective process rather than being subjective. And a high score is not very easy to achieve, but I'm sure we'll go well through the course of this audit. So this just gives you a bit of an idea of the scoring scale. So if you're scoring that 115 to 120, the result will be excellent. As we move down towards the red end of the scale, the lower the score, I guess the more attention needs to be put into the WSP. As we've found with a lot of other audits that we've conducted at the ministry, a lot of new WSPs are down in that sort of 79 to 60 scale of result. Don't be disheartened by that. I mean, particularly if this is your first go through an audit, it is very hard to get those top scores. If you do end up in that yellow zone, that's a fantastic achievement, particularly for an early implementation WSP. And I'm sure if we'll find some room for improvement, and I'm sure over the years we'll see you move up towards that excellent score in the left-hand side of the scale. So just to quickly go through the audit plan, and hopefully this is suitable for everyone, but obviously we're in this Inception meeting at the moment, and it's again great to see that we've got full representation across the business here today. The next activity we'll start doing some interviews, particularly with the WSP team members to work through the documentation side of the WSP. We'll then agree on some field visits, although I did send through some information prior, so hopefully those sites are still acceptable and the operators of those sites are available. But if there's any issues with that, please let me know. We'll have a break for lunch, and then this afternoon we'll work our way through some more site visits, and that'll be the close of day one. So if we now move into day two, we'll have a closed audit session where the team will review what we found on day one, take some scoring and organise any information gaps to be filled on day two. We do understand that sometimes not all the documentation can be made available on the day. If there's anything that we found that's missing, we'll provide that list to you off the back of this session, and give you the opportunity to provide us with that information prior to the end of the audit. We'll go back and do a little bit more document review between 10 and 12. Again, break for lunch, and if necessary, we'll continue to do that information gathering and review of key documents this afternoon, and wrap up about 5 o'clock. Lastly, on day three, we'll have, again, a closed session in the morning where the audit team will review all the information that we've gathered, working out what the score is going to be, complete a draft audit report, and prepare for our exit meeting later that afternoon. And then between 11 and 12 on day three, we'd really appreciate that if everyone that's here today, if you're available, please come back and we'll work through the audit findings and agree on some next steps. And that will conclude the audit. So again, I'm happy to take any questions or comments before, I guess, we start to get into the document review. But look, I'm really looking forward to the next few days. It's a great opportunity for us to work our way through your WSP and look for opportunities for improvement. And yeah, look, I really appreciate all your time. So thank you so much, and looking forward to a great audit.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David, the auditor. I hope you remember that yesterday I said that there was no need to get too overwhelmed because help is right here. And in the audit toolbox, it's got an Inception meeting template, which happens to be on pages 30 and 31. You can look at that later. And David, the auditor, actually used this template. He just tailored it to suit his particular group, just like you can do.
Thank you very much, Daryl, and thank you to David, the auditor, who walked us through that Inception meeting. Okay, so next we'll revisit the topic of information gathering that we touched on yesterday. So yesterday we talked about the different sources of information an auditor needs to consider. Those are shown here on this slide. The WSP document itself, various other documents and records, staff interviews, and field observations. So in other words, we've talked about what an auditor should explore and investigate to assess a WSP. Today, we'll cover how an auditor should explore and investigate, things to do and not to do. So an auditor should always be a WSP detective. Be curious and attentive and inquisitive. An auditor should look for evidence. Limit yes or no questions that are asked, and ask questions that will truly strengthen your understanding. It can be useful to consider these question stems when asking questions. Can you please show me a record of? How often do you do this or that? Can you please show me a record of when that was last done? The WSP on page 65 says you do this or that. Can you please give me an example of this and show me a record? Do you face any challenges carrying out this or that as planned? So do you see how these open questions will be much more effective at drawing out information as compared to a yes or no question? So let's do a little role-playing exercise. Let's suppose that I'm the auditor and Daryl represents the water supplier that's being audited. So I want to assess this question 1.1 from the scoring form, which is there a documented WSP team? And is the team list current? Well, for the first part of this question, is there a documented WSP team? I don't need to ask Daryl anything at all. I can look in the WSP document and see for myself if the WSP team is listed in the document. So I look and I see that it's there. But to find out the second part, is that team list current? I'm going to have to ask Daryl some questions. So I have a look, I see the audit team, and I say to Daryl, hey, Daryl, is the team list I see here current?
Absolutely, 100% correct, fully up to date.
Okay, well, so that's one way I can ask. Here's another way. Instead of giving Daryl that easy out of just saying yes, I'm going to phrase my question in a different way that allows me to dig a bit deeper. So I'll say, Daryl, let's look together at this WSP team list here in your water safety plan document. What is the current role of this person, person X here?
Oh, yeah, they retired last year.
Oh, okay, I see. Let's keep looking down this list. How about person Y? What does this person do on the WSP team?
Oh, they transferred, but don't worry about that. We've got a plan. We'll sort it out.
Okay.
In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that person because I've just realised he's been on extended sick leave for a while. I hope he's okay.
I hope he is too. So I see, it seems that there's quite a few people who on this list who are no longer part of your WSP team. So it will be helpful to update this team list to reflect those changes.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yep.
Okay.
Thanks for the tip.
My pleasure. That's my job. Thanks, Daryl. Okay, so do you see how much more effective that approach is at drawing out improvement opportunities? So it's very natural for a water supplier to feel a bit guarded and to always try to give the right answer. And it's our job as an auditor to be a bit creative in how we ask questions to try to draw out what is the real answer. So let's practice this in our breakout rooms. Working in groups, we're going to look at the questions from the scoring form, which is shown on the next slide. And we're going to imagine that you all are auditors and just have a discussion about what would be good examples of questions and information gathering for that question. So these are the questions exactly as they're written on the scoring form. They're not the questions that you want to explicitly ask. As we just demonstrated, that doesn't really get you the information that you need as an auditor. So at auditors, we need to think creatively about what questions to ask so that we could arrive at these conclusions. So let's look at the second question, this question 6.4. Does the supplier have a documented and implemented system for regularly monitoring and recording consumer satisfaction? So what questions would you ask as an auditor to make this determination? This is activity 10 in your activity handouts. Okay, so you'll have, Daryl, I'm suggesting 8 minutes instead of 10. If you're able to make that change on the fly, Daryl. So you'll have 8 minutes in your breakout sessions and we will see you soon.
We're just going to review and discuss in this plenary session question 6.4, which is what you were looking at before. So your task was to decide what sort of questions might you ask to look at question 6.4, which was, does the supplier have a documented and implemented system for regular monitoring and recording consumer satisfaction? And I hope that you had some time just to explore and talk about that. So looking at 6.4, for example, here's some ideas on the sort of questions that you may ask. Remember, you're trying to think of questions to try and tease information out and rather than just asking yes, no questions. So here's some examples of the sort of questions, and I hope that in your discussion, if you got to that, you're able to think of some of these issues. For example, to answer that question, you may ask, what is your system checking that customers are satisfied? So this question is all about customer satisfaction. So you'll just ask them, how in your system do you check that customers are satisfied? Get them to talk about it. And you might ask them, well, how are those checks actually carried out? Do you do phone interviews? Do you do paper surveys? Do you do something online? Get them to talk about that system. And then you might ask questions like, how often are these carried out? Because remember, you're trying to seek an answer to give you information as to how well they have documented and implemented a system for regular monitoring and recording customer satisfaction. And then finally, you could ask a question like, well, can you show me the results of your most recent feedback and check? And that's when they say, oh yeah, we've got it right here, and then you can look at it. And that will give you a real lot of confidence and information about how well they're actually doing that. We're going to have a really interesting session now, I think. So anyway, we're talking about scoring. And this is a really challenging part of doing auditing, and therefore it makes it quite interesting. So before we talk too much about the detail, here are 3 tips when you are auditing. First one is to follow the scoring guidance. And this makes the auditing consistent. The second one is to be tough, but be fair. Remember, auditing is about improvement. So if you're too lenient in the scoring, then things are very unlikely to improve. And that's one reason for setting the right expectations in the Inception meeting, like David was talking about in the mock Inception meeting when he talked about it's hard to get a high score, and it helps people to be ready for that. And the third tip is to document the reasons for the score. Justify it. This makes your score objective, rational, and defendable. But even with clear guidance and scoring, it can be quite challenging. And you'll soon discover that. So we're going to be doing a breakout room activity. And I think this is a really good activity. And I'm hoping it's going to generate a lot of good, robust discussion. So bear with me because it takes a little while to set the scenario up. You're going to be considering this question. The question that you're going to be looking at is question 2.3, which says, are clear, accurate, and up-to-date maps and/or schematics of the complete water system included? So that's the question as an auditor you're trying to answer. Now, the tips for the auditor and the scoring guidance are the following. Follow the flow of the water from the catchment to the consumer on the schematics and maps to confirm clarity and consistency. Field verify the information provided and note any errors or inconsistencies. Also, discuss the schematic details with staff and ask them if there have been any changes. And here's the scoring guidance. Score 4 if the maps and schematics are detailed, if they're clear, if they're complete and accurate and up to date. Score 2 if those maps and schematics are included but not fully clear and not fully complete or not entirely accurate or up to date. Score 0 if they're not included. And as an auditor, you can use scores 1 and 3 at your discretion for something in between scores 4 and 2 and 2 and 0 and so on. That's what you're going to be doing. That is your task. I'm going to give you a scenario, and your task is to use those tips to answer the question and use the scoring guide to answer the question. Now, I'm going to give you a scenario about the differences between the WSP documentation, what you saw in their WSP document, and the reality in the field. So this particular exercise, we're going to focus on the water treatment plant. And this is a schematic or drawing of their water treatment plant. And I just want to show you what's there. So give you a very quick overview. You've got the raw water source. It comes in, there's clarification, there's flocculation going there, there's alum and there's lime being added. It goes into a sedimentation tank. The water from the sedimentation tank goes through a sand filter. The sand filter, filtrate water comes out and it goes into a reservoir just before distribution to consumers. There's chlorine intake point there. You'll notice the backwash water comes into the filters and backwash just goes somewhere. You're not quite sure where. You presume it just drops out somewhere. And the same with the scour and the sludge from the sedimentation tank. It just says it goes out somewhere. So what you've done as an auditor is that you've looked at the question, and from your WSP review, you've made these notes. You've said, well, there's a process flow treatment steps and chemical addition points are clear. The valves are included, the key valves are included, and it's not clear whether there's any standby or reserve pump. So you've already made some observations about that system. And then you actually asked the team when you're on site doing the audit, and you've said here, well, the discussions have indicated that the schematic is accurate and complete. So you've done that, and then you're about to go into the field. And when you get to the field, you discover a couple of things that are different from what was documented. I'll start on the right-hand side. First of all, you notice that the chlorine injection point is after, not before, the clear water storage, so before it goes out to the distribution. And secondly, you notice that the backwash water from the filters and the sludge from the sedimentation tanks go into a backwash recovery tank, and then they go straight up there. The supernatant for that goes into the head of the plant. So that's what you've noticed when you went to the field, okay? And then, of course, you're keeping notes here. So these are the notes that you've raised when you went to your field visit. You said the backwash water returned to the head of the plant, and the chlorine injection at the outlet of the clear water storage is at the outlet of the clear water storage rather than at the inlet, which is what the drawing had said. Now, the activity you're going to have, and you'll have 15 minutes to talk about this in your group, is bearing in mind the differences you found between the paper version, what was in the WSP document, and what was in the field. The question is, what score are you going to allocate for that particular question? And I'll just summarize that again. Here's all the information that you know. You've discovered these things. This is the question and the scoring guidance. So the question again, you're going to resolve and discuss. You'll actually end up discussing this because you'll have some toing and froing. What should I give them? Should it be a 4 or a 2 or 0 or another number?
Also, it's one collective score for your group. One score, one agreed score.
Okay, enjoy. Have a really good discussion. This is a great exercise to talk about things.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope that activity was interesting and drew out some good discussion and debate. Daryl and I really liked that one ourselves. So you may have experienced some challenges agreeing on one score as a group, which is indeed a challenge for audits that are conducted by a team of people. People don't always agree on the score, and it could be a bit of work reaching a consensus. So now Daryl's going to launch a poll, and please do share the score that your group agreed on, not what you individually wanted to see happen, but what was the one score that your group collectively decided.
Okay, so the results are 94% of people said the group agreed on a score of 2, and 6%, which was only 2 people, said it was 4.
First comment is, this is really interesting. Daryl and I have done this activity a few times through the years, and I've never seen so much agreement on what the score should be. So very interesting to see that the overwhelming majority of you assigned a score of 2. I'm curious if it was clear to everybody that scores of 1 and 3 were just as viable, even though there was only scoring guidance provided for 0, 2, and 4. But also interesting to see that a couple of groups assigned a score of 4. So let's take a little bit of time. Let's see how this goes. Kind of challenging in this format that we have, but hopefully in your groups, you designated one reporter or a spokesperson. So I would love to hear from the designated spokesperson from a group that assigned a score of 4. Could you please turn on your mic and explain your rationale? Okay, so we'll go with then one of the groups, please, one of the designated spokespeople from one of the groups that assigned the score of 2. We'd love to hear your rationale for a score of 2. So let's see how this goes. One person, please.
Yeah, hello, I'm from group 3, and we scored this question as a 2 because there is the map or the schematic detail is there, but we couldn't find it as up to date and accurately implementing. That's why we just we have a long discussion about either 2 or 3, and later on we kind of landed up on the score 2.
Was there any discussion about sort of the particular issues that were identified and how important those issues were, the chlorination and the backwash problem? Did that factor into your decision?
Yeah, we did the big discussion on those 2 issues, because the chlorination, if the chlorination what actually is being there is the nearer community will get the we could not get the sufficient contact time for the chlorination after chlorination, and they could have some overdose of the chlorine consumption, and the backflow, yeah, and the backflow water has been again used in the water inlet. It may contribute to the middle put on the loads of the turbidity of the water, and it is not actually planned in the detailed schematic plan. That's
okay. So your group was exploring a score of 2 and 3, and part of the rationale for deciding on 2 was that those 2 issues had some important water quality implications. So
yeah,
on a score of 2.
Yeah, among we 10 participants in the group. Finally we do some sorts of polling.
Okay.
How many are in 2 and how many are in 3, and majority have expressed their opinion on score 2, and then we make a consensus to score.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much for sharing. So we have time to hear from one more group, another group who assigned 2. If somebody else would like to share their rationale, anything to add to group 3?
We had similar, discussion like group 3, and although we had very few participants, but we had a very experienced facilitator, Mr. Bonnie. So we also agreed on a score of 2, because even though that schematic diagram is included, it's not clear, and it's not accurate, and it's not up to date. For example, as in schematic diagram, it's shown that chlorination is done after clear water tank, but whereas in in before clear water tank, but in the field it's that chlorination is done after that clear water tank.
Yep.
And likewise, it's not up to date. For example, the backwash water is being recycled. So even though we had some discussions on whether to give 2 or 3, but unanimously we decided of giving a score as 2.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much for explaining. So appreciate hearing from those 2 groups.
Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and move forward then. We'd like to ask an expert here. And this time our expert will be Daryl. So we'll ask Daryl, who is an expert auditor, how he would score this particular question. So Daryl, could you please weigh in here? As an experienced WSP auditor, not as our course trainer, what score would you personally assign in this situation and why?
I hope you can see I'm an expert, but I've got my hat on. So this is the rationale that I would do. And I'm obviously going to be an outlier in your poll. I like to work by elimination. Okay, so it's definitely not a 4, and it's definitely not a 0. So I rule those 2 out. For me, the most it could possibly be is a 2, because as you've all said, it's not accurate and it's not up to date. So for me, that would be the highest score I could possibly consider. So therefore, for me, it's either a 1 or a 2. And I'm going to give it a 1, and I'll tell you why I'm going to give it a 1. The first thing is the issue of chlorination. Effective chlorination is really fundamental, because if it's chlorinated at the outlet of the reservoir before it goes to customers, they probably won't have their 30 minutes contact time. So for me, the diagram is incorrect on a really fundamental issue, and that makes me suspicious about other things on the diagram. So I'm concerned right away as soon as I saw that. My feeling is if they've got that wrong, did they get something else wrong? And because chlorination really affects the risk assessments they're going to make. Secondly, on the backwash and sludge, that water is probably going to be quite highly contaminated water, and its addition to the raw water inlet adds a lot of risk factors. So I think that's also very significant. And thirdly, while I recognize that the diagram may be a little simplistic for our training purposes, there are other things missing on the diagram and schematic that are important. For example, where are the monitoring points? So for me, it's a 1, not a 2.
Okay, thank you, Daryl. That reasoning is really sound. Thank you for walking us through it. I'm taking away 2 points. Firstly, you're a no-nonsense auditor, and suppliers should beware, even if you're not wearing a suit. Secondly, I note that one of the reasons for your low score is that one of the errors is related to chlorination, which is so critical to water quality and microbial risk management. So with an error that's significant, you feel compelled to score a bit lower. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask the group another question. Considering all that we've discussed and heard, what is your opinion on this question? Should all errors and inaccuracies be weighted equally when assigning a score? Okay, so I see here that nearly 90% of you have answered that inaccuracies with greater risk implications should have a greater impact on the audit score. And Daryl and I would agree with that answer. We would agree with that 88% of you. So all errors are not created equal. When an error or an omission in a system schematic has considerable implications for the hazard identification that comes next and the risk management that follows that, we as auditors would be inclined to lend those errors more weight and adjust the score downward accordingly. So we are in agreement with the majority of you. Okay, so in conclusion, you remember this slide from earlier that Daryl flagged. He showed us that even with clear scoring guidance, scoring can be a challenging exercise, and there really aren't clear right or wrong answers. So the best we can do is to follow scoring guidance, be consistent in our approach with that, and document our rationale for the scores that we assign. So with that, I'll hand over to Daryl for our final session of today.
I'm just reflecting on that, Angela. It strikes me that the fact that so many people said yes, the degree of the significance should affect the score. I wonder whether we did that exercise again, whether it might be a little different in the scores they allocated. And I think it also highlights the fact that an auditor needs to understand the technical issues and context of something. It isn't just a paperwork issue. It's a matter of understanding what risks are and what hazards and hazardous events are and how they can really influence the safety of the water.
That's a good point, Daryl, and just a good segue into mentioning that tomorrow we do spend some time covering auditor qualifications. So that's an important consideration, is that technical expertise that needs to be, that is one of the important auditor qualifications.
So I hope by now you appreciate that doing the scoring is not a simple tick flick exercise. And you need some quiet space where you can, just the auditors can discuss and debate the issues. And this is especially true for new auditors, because you've really got to concentrate and you read those scoring criteria very carefully. You say, is it a 2? And someone in the team, if you've got someone else, will say, look, these are the reasons I think it's a 1. And sometimes the team might be swayed to change its mind or whatever. So you have to concentrate. And the reason we suggest you do that by yourself, especially for new teams, is that it's not because you're trying to hide the scoring logic. You've already told them what your logic is, but simply it's a reality that it takes time and quiet space to give the scoring proper consideration. You've got about 30 questions. So in the audit plan, you can see at the bottom of the screen, you can see there was time set aside from 8 o'clock till 10 o'clock for the closed auditing session. Now, I have a feeling that that was based on one of the audits I did at one of the countries in South Asia. And I can tell you that we needed those 2 hours. We were really pushed in that time to go through the 30 questions, talk about the evidence we had, and assign a score. So you do need that time to do that. Now, I'd like you to think about the forms in this way. You can think about the note-taking form, that's the one with the coloured columns in it, and a scoring form as the private form. So the note-taking form you do publicly and people see you doing it. That's fine. The scoring form is more private when you prepare your score. But when you prepare your final audit report, most of the information that's in that scoring form will be summarized. It's certainly going to be used in that audit report. You'll present it a little differently, but everything in there, you'll be justifying the score. So for every question, you will tend to say, it's got a score of 2, this is why. It didn't get a 3 because of that, it didn't get a 1 because of that. Normally you'd say why it didn't go something higher. So that's a nice way to think about those forms. You're not trying to be secretive. It's just the reality of doing things, and you will be sharing everything anyway. That issue of having like a private session when you're developing your scores, the question I want you to consider in the groups is, what are some of the reasons to avoid scoring in front of the water supplier? And you hopefully got a taste of some of the issues. So if you can consider that in your groups, there's no need to do any paperwork or anything else there. You will find those instructions if you want to look at them, activity number 12, but the question is, what are some of the reasons why you might do that? And I will send you to a breakout room right now. Okay, so we've just got a couple of minutes left, and we'll just finish off here. So I hope you had another good discussion. It's a really interesting question. So I want to give you a couple of practical reasons why we think that scoring, to avoid scoring publicly. And we won't have time to discuss this a lot with you. I think particularly, and this is true for particularly new auditors, watching the scores as assigned can make a supplier feel really nervous, and it's also particularly true for a supplier that hasn't been through the process before. It's very daunting. They think they're being marked and tested. So that's another reason to have all of those discussions within, particularly when you have an auditing team, to just do that quietly, and it helps the supplier feel a little less nervous or intimidated. Scoring in front of a supplier can make the auditor feel a little vulnerable, that they might be sort of influenced a certain way. And the idea of the auditor is to be objective, follow the scoring criteria. So doing it by yourself just gives you that space without any undue influence from outside. And as we've just said, it does take time to do this here, because you want to look at all the evidence, and you'll find when there's a team of people, you might have decided it was a 2, and someone else in the team says, but I saw such and such. You say, okay, that's interesting. I didn't pick that up. So it all takes time, and you need space to do that. And I hope that your group identified some of those issues. And if you've identified something else, please put it in the chat and just say, here's another reason. That would be quite useful. And we can share those things tomorrow. Right. So that's all for today, folks. We hope it's been another fruitful and useful session for you.